On a chilly morning in the heart of Willowbrook, the old Hammond house glowed beneath a sky stitched with soft gold. In its shadow sat Sunny, a golden retriever, with eyes wise as autumn and fur that caught every sunbeam like a promise. Today the air carried a whisper of endings, of beginnings, of a secret pact between a loyal heart and the winding road of fate. But what unfolds when the only thing holding a home together is the memory of a gentle man and the steadfast hope of a dog who refuses to give up? Before you turn away, pause with us at this doorstep, because what waits inside is a tale of love, loss, laughter, and the kind of miracle that only happens when hearts refuse to let go. Stay with us. The next chapter may just change the way you see loyalty forever. The sun rose gently over Willowbrook, a quiet town in Oregon, nestled between dense forests and golden meadows. It was late September, and the air carried a crispness that hinted at autumn's arrival. Maple leaves had begun to turn, dotting the sidewalks in fiery shades of red and gold. Mist still hung low above the rooftops as the morning unfolded, softening the edges of the world. The Hammond house, a small wooden cottage with peeling green shutters and a sagging porch, stood at the edge of Willow Street, where sunlight filtered through old oak trees, dappling the windows with shifting patterns. Inside, the silence was broken only by the faint ticking of a mantel clock and the steady shuffling of Mr. Walter Hammond's slippers as he prepared for his day, a day that felt different from all the others. Walter Hammond, at 78, was a man time had shaped with gentle and relentless hands. He was of average height with stooped shoulders that hinted at years of work as a schoolteacher, and a life marked by both patience and loss. His face, deeply lined but kind, carried the faded traces of youthful humor. His thin, silvery hair was neatly combed, and his pale blue eyes, though often weary, retained a stubborn spark. Walter had lived in Willowbrook for over 40 years, first with his beloved wife Margaret, then after her passing alone, but for the company of a loyal companion. That companion was Sunny, a golden retriever with a gleaming honey-gold coat, soft brown eyes, and the air of a gentle giant. At 9 years old, Sunny was large and muscular, but there was an unmistakable gentleness in every movement. His broad head, expressive eyes, and feathered tail made him the favorite of every child on Willow Street, but Sunny only ever had eyes for Walter. To Walter, Sunny was not just a pet, but a confidant, a quiet presence who filled the house with warmth that no heater ever could. He had been a rescue pup brought home after Margaret's passing, and the bond between man and dog had grown deeper with each passing year. This morning, Walter moved with deliberate care, every action tinged with a strange sense of anticipation. He filled the kettle, laid out a single cup and saucer, and reached for the jar of instant coffee, a habit he had never shaken despite decades of admonitions from Margaret to make it properly. As he stirred the coffee, his hand trembled more than usual, and he paused, closing his eyes against a sudden wave of dizziness. Sunny, who had been watching from his bed in the corner, immediately rose and pressed his warm, furry body against Walter's legs. The dog's head reached almost to Walter's hip. He nudged Walter's trembling hand with a gentle insistence as if to say, "I'm here." Walter smiled weakly, ruffling Sunny's ears. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" he murmured, "always watching out for me." Sunny's tail thumped quietly against the floor, but his gaze never left Walter's face. There was something in the dog's eyes, a deep animal wisdom perhaps, or just the unspoken understanding of creatures who have learned to wait. The morning routine continued, but with more pauses than usual. Walter took his medicine, counted the pills twice, then glanced at the calendar pinned to the kitchen wall. A small square around today's date read, Dr. Sullivan, 9:30 a.m. Walter's heart had been troubling him for years, but lately the episodes had come more often, tightness in his chest, breathless moments when he had to grip the table and wait for the world to steady. Dr. Sullivan, a stocky man with quick eyes and a gentle voice, had insisted on more regular checkups. Walter, stubborn as ever, had protested at first, but Sunny had a way of making such things feel less daunting, waiting patiently by the door until his master was ready to go. Walter dressed slowly, a plaid shirt, clean slacks, his old wool cardigan. His hands shook as he buttoned it. In the hallway mirror, he studied his own reflection, seeing not just the lines and age spots, but also the quiet courage it took to face another uncertain day. Sunny sat in the doorway, head tilted, watching every move. When Walter stooped to tie his shoes, Sunny pressed closer, resting his chin gently on Walter's knee. Outside, the air was brisk, and the wind rustled through the leaves with a sound like distant applause. Walter leaned on his cane, a polished length of cherry wood, a retirement gift from his students years ago, and took a deep breath. He turned to Sonny. "Just a quick trip, old friend," he said softly. "I'll be back before lunch, I promise." The promise hung in the air, almost fragile. Sonny trotted beside him as he walked to the battered old Ford parked under the carport. Walter hesitated at the door, patting Sonny's head one last time before getting in. "Stay and watch the house, okay?" he said, trying to inject a lightness into his tone. Sonny sat obediently on the porch tail, curled around his paws, watching with grave intensity as Walter started the engine and backed slowly out onto Willow Street. The drive to Willowbrook Clinic was uneventful, the roads still slick with dew. Dr. Sullivan greeted Walter with his usual warm handshake. "Morning, Walter. How are you feeling today?" Walter managed a smile. "Could be better, Doc, but I'm still kicking." They chatted about the weather, the latest antics of local children, and Walter's garden now mostly overrun with wildflowers since he lacked the energy to weed. Dr. Sullivan performed his usual examination, frowning as he listened to Walter's heart. "I'm going to run a few tests," he said. "Just routine, but let's be thorough." Walter obliged, letting himself be poked and prodded, even as the room seemed to close in around him. He tried to focus on thoughts of home, the porch swing Margaret had loved, the maple tree in the yard that turned the brightest red every fall, and Sonny always waiting. An hour passed, then two. Walter felt increasingly unwell, his breath growing shallow, pain blooming in his chest like a dark flower. Dr. Sullivan's expression shifted from friendly to concerned. "Walter, I think we should keep you here for observation, just to be safe." Walter tried to protest. He hated hospitals, the smell of antiseptic, the hum of machines, but the pain was too great. Nurses arrived efficient and kind, helping him onto a gurney as the world narrowed to the sound of beeping monitors and the blur of white ceiling tiles. Back at home, Sonny waited. The hours crawled by. He sat on the porch as the morning brightened, ears pricked at every passing car, every footstep. Mrs. June Foster, the neighbor from across the street, bustled past on her way to the market. She was a woman in her mid-60s, tall and slender, with silver hair always tied in a neat bun, and a face both elegant and reserved. June rarely spoke to the neighbors beyond polite greetings, carrying an air of quiet sorrow that set her apart, a sorrow rooted in the loss of her only daughter in a car accident years before. As she passed, she looked at Sonny, her face softening. "Good morning, Sonny," she called quietly. Sonny flicked his tail, but did not move from his post. By midday, clouds had gathered, casting the street in cool, shifting light. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby yard, but Sonny's gaze remained fixed on the driveway. He ignored the food Walter had set out that morning, sniffed at his water bowl, then returned to his watch. As afternoon faded into evening, the porch light clicked on, automatically bathing Sonny in a golden glow. Still, he did not move. In the hospital, Walter drifted in and out of sleep, plagued by dreams of home, of Sonny waiting, of Margaret's laughter, of autumn leaves swirling in the wind. Dr. Sullivan checked in, often his voice reassuring, but the worry in his eyes impossible to hide. Walter squeezed the doctor's hand, once muttering, "Take care of my boy, will you?" The doctor nodded solemnly. Back on Willow Street, the night air grew cold. Mrs. June Foster, returning from the store, noticed Sonny still sitting on the porch, his body tense, eyes bright with hope that refused to fade. She hesitated, heart aching at the sight. For a long moment she stood in her own driveway, watching dog and house, feeling the weight of silence that hung between them. As midnight came and went, Sonny remained at his post, vigilant and unmoving, a golden statue etched against the darkness. Inside the house was quiet, no footsteps, no laughter, only the faint echo of a promise, "I'll be back before lunch." The next morning dawned gray and restless, heavy clouds pressing low over Willowbrook. A cold drizzle swept through the quiet streets, beating on the window panes and turning fallen leaves into slick mosaics along the sidewalk. In this dreary light, the Hammond house looked lonelier than ever, a cottage with its porch light still burning, as if it refused to surrender to the encroaching gloom. On the top step, Sonny sat exactly as he had all night, his golden fur dull with dew, eyes unblinking and fixed on the closed door. Hours passed in silent vigil. Children hurried to school in bright raincoats, glancing with pity and curiosity at the motionless dog. The mailman, Mr. David Melvin, a cheerful man in his 50s with a round face and graying hair, paused at the mailbox. He watched Sonny for a moment, noting the untouched food and water bowls and the slumped, resolute posture of the dog. "Poor boy," he muttered, shoving a handful of letters into the slot, and continued down the street shaking his head. Across the road, Mrs. June Foster watched from her kitchen window. At 66, June was a tall, thin woman whose every movement seemed careful and considered as though she bore an invisible weight. Her silver hair was always pulled back into a tidy bun, and her pale gray eyes missed little that happened on Willow Street. Since losing her husband to illness years before, she'd lived quietly tending her small flower garden and avoiding unnecessary conversation. Her grief had made her cautious, but not unkind. June noticed details like the porch light left on, all night the uncollected newspaper, and Sonny's unwavering presence. After breakfast, June wrapped herself in a soft blue shawl and stepped out into the drizzle, crossing the empty street. She paused at the Hammond gate, calling softly Sonny's sweetheart. Her voice was gentle but firm, tinged with the confidence of someone who'd raised children and comforted lost animals before. Sonny did not move, only flicked his ears in recognition. June stood for a moment, then stepped onto the porch, crouching slowly so as not to startle him. "Hey there, boy," she murmured, reaching out a tentative hand. Sonny sniffed her fingers, but his gaze slid immediately back to the door, his loyalty anchored to hope. June sighed and straightened rain dampening her shawl. She glanced around, noting the forlorn state of the garden, the gathering puddles on the porch. Walter's absence hung heavy in the air. "I'll be back, Sonny," she promised, her voice nearly lost in the rain. Inside her house, June made several phone calls, first to the Willowbrook Clinic, then to the police station seeking any word about Walter. She spoke to Officer Henry Reed, a burly, soft-spoken man with sandy hair and kind blue eyes. Henry had grown up in Willowbrook and was known for his patience and respect for the town's elders. "I'm afraid Mr. Hammond passed away last night," he told her gently, the weight of the news in his voice. "He went quietly, Miss Foster. Dr. Sullivan says there wasn't much pain." June's hand tightened on the phone. "And his dog?" she asked, still waiting, poor thing. "If you need anything, let us know," Henry added, understanding what these little rituals meant to the people of Willowbrook. June sat for a long moment after hanging up her mind heavy with memories, her own losses, the quiet days since her husband's passing, and now this new echo of grief across the street. She watched Sonny from her window as the day dragged on. He moved only to adjust his position on the cold porch, refusing to eat or drink. His attention riveted to the silence behind the front door. By afternoon, neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Carla Myers, a middle-aged woman with curly brown hair and an easy laugh, stopped by with her teenage son, Marcus. They stood on the sidewalk, whispering. "Has anyone checked on Mr. Hammond?" Marcus asked. "I haven't seen him in days." Carla shook her head, concern furrowing her brow. June stepped out to meet them, explaining softly what she had learned. "Sonny's still waiting," she finished, glancing back at the house. As dusk approached and rain intensified, June gathered her courage and tried again. This time she brought a bowl of chicken broth, hoping the familiar scent might coax Sonny to eat. She set the bowl beside him, speaking softly. "Walter would want you to stay strong, sweetheart." But Sonny ignored the food, his nose-twitching tail curled tightly around his body. He trembled slightly as if the chill was seeping through his thick fur into his bones. Unable to bear it any longer, June sat down beside him, ignoring the wet boards. She spoke to him in gentle tones, telling stories about Walter, about the years before, about her own dog from childhood. Rain drummed on the porch roof, and in that shared solitude June felt a kinship, a silent understanding between those who had lost and those who could only wait. As darkness fell, other neighbors checked in. Mr. Melvin, the mailman, stopped to drop off a small parcel for Walter, and lingered a moment, hat in hand. He told June about his own dog lost to old age last winter. "They don't know how to give up," he said quietly, nodding towards Sonny. "They wait. That's all they know." June nodded, her heart aching with the truth of it. Later that night, June returned one last time, carrying an old woolen blanket. She draped it over Sonny's back, murmuring, "You're not alone, boy. I promise." For a brief moment, Sonny leaned into her touch, his body warm and trembling beneath the thick golden fur. Then he turned back to the door, resuming his watch as if nothing had changed. Inside the Hammond house remained dark and silent, save for the steady tick of the mantel clock. The world outside was shrinking, reduced to a small circle of light, where one dog refused to let go, and one woman, shaped by her own sorrows, resolved to keep watch with him for as long as it took. By the time Thursday arrived, Willowbrook found itself in the grip of an autumn storm. The sky roared with thunder, the wind tore at the trees, and sheets of rain pelted the sleepy street, blurring the world beyond June Foster's window into a watercolor of gray and gold. The usually peaceful rhythm of the neighborhood was replaced by the wild percussion of rain against rooftops and the restless swaying of ancient maples. June moved about her kitchen with a heaviness she couldn't shake. She was tall and slender, her shoulders slightly stooped face, lined by years of loss and weathered by time. Since the passing of her only child in a car accident a decade earlier, June had worn her grief quietly shaping her days around small, steady acts of care. Tea in the morning, tending flowers, keeping an eye on the world from behind her kitchen curtains. The sorrow in her heart was a constant thrum, softened only by moments of kindness and the slow, patient rituals of living alone. Thunder cracked as June peered out across the street at the Hammond house. The porch light flickered, casting a dim circle onto the flooded steps. There, barely visible through the downpour, was Sonny, his golden fur plastered to his frame, body curled in a tight, shivering knot at the top of the porch. His usual poise had faded into exhaustion, eyes half closed against the cold. The sight wrenched something loose inside June, a chord struck between her own loneliness and the dog's relentless vigil. Without hesitation, she pulled on her raincoat, grabbed an old tartan umbrella, and splashed across the road, boots squelching in the rising water. Sonny. "Oh, darling," she called over the wind, her voice trembling as she knelt before him. He barely lifted his head, but a faint whine rose from his throat as she stroked his sodden fur. His ribs quivered beneath her touch. "You can't stay here, not tonight," she murmured, glancing at the locked door, as if expecting Walter to appear and shoo her away. Instead, there was only the endless drum of rain and the stubborn silence of the house. June coaxed Sonny to his feet with gentle persistence, bracing his weight as they hurried across the street, the storm swirling around them. Inside her warm kitchen, she wrapped him in a faded blue towel and began rubbing his fur dry, humming softly a lullaby she'd sung to her daughter long ago. Sonny trembled, then let out a sigh so deep it seemed to empty years of sadness onto the tile floor. For the first time in days, he relaxed, resting his head against June's knee. She watched him, her eyes misty, feeling a strange new hope stir beneath her grief. That night, as wind battered the windows and lightning lit the sky, June fashioned a bed for Sonny from an old quilt beside the fireplace. She sat with him until his breathing slowed, her hand on his head, grateful for the company, grateful even for the simple act of caring for something fragile and good. It was a comfort she hadn't felt in years, as if both their wounds fit together in some silent, necessary way. The storm passed by morning, leaving puddles shimmering on the pavement and the air fresh with the scent of wet earth. Sonny stirred at dawn, lifting his head to watch June as she moved through her morning routine. He was still subdued, appetite slow to return, but he accepted the small meal she offered and followed her from room to room, never straying far. Later that day, as the clouds parted and weak sunlight filtered through the windows, a new sound echoed from the front gate, the quick light patter of feet, followed by a voice high and cheerful. "Mrs. Foster, are you home?" It was Sophie Harris, the 8-year-old girl who lived 3 houses down. Sophie was a sprite of a child, all bright blue eyes and freckled cheeks, her hair a wild tangle of copper curls, usually pulled back in a lopsided ponytail. Sophie's mother, Tara Harris, was a single parent, warm, energetic, and perpetually busy. So Sophie often found herself roaming the neighborhood, searching for adventures or friendly faces. Despite her youth, Sophie was wise in the way of children who'd known loss her father had left before she was born, and she carried an air of quiet resilience beneath her playful chatter. June opened the door to find Sophie on the porch, rain boots splattered and holding a plastic bag. "Mama baked too many cookies," she explained with a grin. She said, "I could bring you some. Are you okay? I saw you with the dog last night." Her gaze slipped past June, widening as she spotted Sonny curled on the rug. "Is that Mr. Hammond's dog?" June ushered Sophie inside, grateful for the sudden warmth her presence brought. "This is Sonny," she said gently. "He's staying with me for a little while. He's been very sad." Sophie knelt carefully, extending her small hand, her voice a soft whisper. "Hey there, buddy." Sonny sniffed her palm-tail, thumping faintly. "Can I pet him?" Sophie asked, looking up at June for permission. When June nodded, Sophie grinned and sat cross-legged, stroking Sonny's ears. "He looks lonely. I get that way sometimes too. Mama says it helps to have a friend." June felt tears prick her eyes, surprised at how easily Sophie's kindness reached both her and the dog. The three of them sat together, sharing cookies and stories. Sophie spoke of school and friends of her dreams, to be a veterinarian, of the books she loved, and the ways she missed her father without ever having known him. In her clear-eyed innocence, she drew June and Sonny out of themselves, gently stitching the beginnings of a new family from the threads of their broken hearts. Over the next few days, Sophie became a regular visitor. She brought books to read aloud, taught Sonny simple tricks, and invented elaborate games that wound through the garden and into the kitchen. Sonny's spirit slowly revived in the presence of her laughter and June's steady care. The dog, who had refused all food, now accepted treats from Sophie's hand, following her from room to room, ears perked and eyes brightening. For June, Sophie's visits brought a sense of purpose and a softness she thought she'd lost. She watched as the two new friends, one golden-furred and the other all freckles and giggles, found healing in each other's company. She too felt her own loneliness begin to thaw her home, filling with light and noise, in ways that seemed impossible only days before. As autumn continued, the bond between the three deepened. Sonny still gazed longingly at the Hammond house, but less often, his loyalty slowly shifting from the past to the present. June, careful and wise, did not rush him. She knew that healing took time, that sometimes the greatest comfort was simply sharing the weight. Autumn's chill deepened, casting long shadows across Willowbrook, as golden leaves drifted onto wet sidewalks and dusk arrived sooner each day. The once quiet house of June Foster had slowly transformed into a place of laughter and companionship, thanks to the presence of Sonny and Sophie. But one Thursday morning, June awoke to an uneasy silence. The quilt on the hearth lay undisturbed, and there was no gentle tap of paws trailing her into the kitchen. Sonny was gone. Panic seized June's heart. She hurried from room to room, calling his name, searching beneath beds and behind doors, peering out the windows as rain began to fall in slow, deliberate drops. There was no sign of the golden dog anywhere in the garden or the narrow alleys between the houses. June's anxiety mounted, her voice growing hoarse as she paced the porch in her old blue cardigan, ignoring the cold drizzle that had begun to darken her hair. Word spread quickly along the quiet street. Tara Harris, Sophie's mother, a petite woman with close-cropped dark hair, warm brown skin, and a ready smile, arrived as soon as she heard the news. Tara was a nurse at the local clinic, known for her level-headed kindness and unwavering patience. She knelt beside June on the porch, her hands firm but gentle. "We'll find him, June. He couldn't have gone far." Sophie, red-cheeked and determined, dashed through puddles from house to house, asking neighbors if they'd seen the golden dog. At 8, Sophie was small for her age, but carried herself with the resolute energy of someone much older, her eyes darting with worry as she clutched a leash in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The search soon involved half the neighborhood. Mrs. Abernathy, the retired librarian, with steel-gray hair and a tidy bun, called from her porch to offer help. She wore large round glasses that magnified her sharp blue eyes, and a green woolen coat that gave her an air of unhurried dignity. "I'll check the playground," she volunteered, her tone brisk, but her gaze concerned. Tom Bradford, the baker who ran Willowbrook's only bakery, joined the search next. Tom was a burly man in his late 50s, with a thick beard dusted in flour and a booming laugh that often startled crows from the bakery's eaves. He had known Walter Hammond for decades, often sharing old war stories and loaves of rye bread in equal measure. Sonny wouldn't run off for no reason. Tom muttered, donning a raincoat that barely covered his broad frame. "Let's check the woods behind the church." June tried to remain calm as the hours crawled by, but dread settled deeper with every passing moment. Sophie circled back to June's house, her hair plastered to her forehead, boots caked in mud. "No one's seen him," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "What if he's lost forever?" June hugged her close, her own voice wavering. "He's smart, Sophie. He loves Walter. Maybe he's looking for him." As evening descended, the searchers gathered under the yellow glow of the street lamps, faces pinched with worry and fatigue. Then, just as hope began to falter, Mrs. Abernathy's grandson, Timmy, a lanky, awkward teen who rarely spoke unless spoken to, approached with news. "I was riding my bike past the cemetery," he said softly, eyes wide, and I think I saw Sonny by the new graves. He was just sitting there, didn't even move when I called. The group exchanged glances, relief and sorrow mingling in their expressions. The Willowbrook Cemetery sat on a low hill at the edge of town, surrounded by iron gates and rows of ancient oaks. Walter Hammond's grave was new, the earth still raw and dark beneath a simple wooden marker. Sophie insisted on coming along, and June, feeling the ache of hope and dread, agreed. They walked together in the deepening dusk, flashlight beams darting between the headstones. The air was sharp with the scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. Tom joined them carrying a basket of warm rolls wrapped in cloth, his contribution to any crisis. As they rounded the bend, the cemetery opened before them, pale under the watchful eye of the moon. There, in the center of the newest section, sat Sonny. His golden fur glowed ghost-like in the gloom, and he was perfectly still, head bowed before Walter's grave. He didn't react as June and Sophie approached, only lifting his gaze when Sophie knelt beside him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She pressed her face into his neck, arms thrown around him. Sonny licked her cheek and leaned into her embrace, a low whine rumbling from his chest. June felt her own tears gather as she knelt on the damp grass, resting a gentle hand on Sonny's back. "He was never lost," she whispered, voice trembling. "He was coming home in his own way." Tom stood back, his large frame softened by the moment. "I remember Walter telling me that loyalty is love, without words," he said quietly. "This dog is proof of that." He placed the basket near Sonny, opening it to let the aroma of bread waft through the cold air. "You're always welcome in my shop, Sonny. Come by any time, I'll save you a roll." News of Sonny's vigil at Walter's grave spread through the town the next day. People stopped by the cemetery, some leaving flowers, others bringing treats or simply standing in quiet respect. Mrs. Abernathy wrote a letter to the local paper, describing the scene with a storyteller's flourish, and soon Willowbrook was abuzz with talk of the loyal golden dog who kept watch in rain and shine. Children made drawings of Sonny to hang in shop windows. Tom set out a special water bowl and dog biscuits by the bakery door. The attention from the community brought a new energy into June's life. Neighbors who had only waved from afar now stopped by to chat or check in, sharing stories of Walter, and more often of the small acts of kindness he'd quietly performed over the years. June found comfort in these moments, her circle of solitude steadily expanding. For Sophie, the story of Sonny's devotion became a lesson in the depth of love and the power of waiting. She visited the cemetery with June and Tom every day after school, bringing a favorite toy or a treat for Sonny sitting beside him to share stories about her dreams, her mother, and the secret hopes she dared not say aloud. And for Sonny, the rituals of grief gradually became rituals of belonging. He would spend hours at Walter's grave, eyes half closed, as if listening for a familiar voice on the wind. But when Sophie arrived, or June called, or Tom appeared with a warm roll, he would rise and follow a little more, each day the burden of his loss lightened by the hands and hearts that reached for him. After the story of Sonny's graveyard vigil spread through Willowbrook, the little town seemed to change in ways both subtle and profound. The first frost of the year dusted the lawns with shimmering white, and the morning sun painted everything in gold, as if in honor of the golden dog who had shown them the meaning of steadfast love. The neighbors, moved by Sonny's loyalty, and the quiet sorrow that lingered at Walter Hammond's grave, began to look at each other and themselves with new eyes. June Foster, whose quiet house had once been a shelter for her loneliness, became the beating heart of something unexpected. The idea came to her over tea one Saturday morning, sunlight pooling in the kitchen and the smell of fresh bread wafting through the open window. She watched Sonny sprawled out in a sunbeam, his chin resting on Sophie's old sneakers, while Sophie herself sat cross-legged nearby, lost in a book. There was a knock at the door. It was Tom Bradford, the burly baker, his arms full of a basket overflowing with day-old rolls and a hopeful grin on his face. "Thought I'd bring these for Sonny's friends," he said. "Maybe we could make a day of it. Kids, dogs, a bit of laughter. Lord knows the town could use more of all three." That morning, a plan was born. June, Tom, and Sophie sat at the kitchen table and drafted a simple flyer on bright yellow paper. Pet Pals, a Saturday gathering for kids, dogs, and neighbors. June's delicate handwriting invited everyone to bring their pets, strays, and rescues, welcome and spend the afternoon making treats, playing games, and swapping stories. That week, Sophie handed out the flyers to her classmates. Tom put one in his bakery window, and Mrs. Abernathy, ever the champion of good causes, posted several at the library and the church bulletin board. Saturday arrived clear and brisk. June's backyard, once a silent patch of grass and faded roses, burst with energy. Children arrived in colorful scarves and coats, their cheeks pink from the cold, and their arms full of toys, blankets, and leashes. Dogs of every shape and size tumbled over each other in a frenzy of sniffing, barking, and tail-wagging delight. Even cats watched from windowsills with cautious curiosity. Sophie took charge of the games, organizing relay races and gentle tug-of-war matches with knotted ropes. Her laughter rang out bright and wild, and June marveled at how much the little girl had blossomed since Sunny came into their lives. The kitchen became a bustling hub, with June supervising batches of homemade dog biscuits, peanut butter oats, and a hint of cinnamon, while Tom demonstrated his not-so-secret trick for shaping dough into perfect bone shapes. The children giggled as they dusted flour from their noses and proudly displayed their handiwork. In the midst of this, a new face appeared at the edge of the garden. Luis Martinez stood with one hand clutching his mother's coat, his eyes wide and uncertain. Luis had moved to Willowbrook only 2 weeks earlier, a quiet 7-year-old with olive skin, dark wavy hair, and eyes the color of slate. He rarely spoke in class and had yet to join the other children at play. His mother, Elena, a gentlewoman with soft features and a calming presence, whispered encouragement in Spanish, but Luis only inched closer when Sunny trotted over tail, wagging slowly. Sunny, sensing something fragile in the boy, sat quietly by his side and nudged Luis's hand with his nose. After a hesitant moment, Luis smiled a small, tentative thing and reached out to stroke the golden fur. The change was subtle, but immediate. Sophie, ever the social ambassador, skipped over and invited Luis to help her decorate a batch of dog treats. Within the hour, Luis was laughing with the others, his shyness melting in the warmth of shared purpose and gentle acceptance. Tom, watching from the kitchen, remarked, "That dog could melt a glacier, June." As the afternoons grew colder and the gatherings became tradition, June's home became a sanctuary not just for Sunny, but for every creature and person in town who needed a place to belong. Mrs. Abernathy offered to run a reading circle for children about animals and kindness. Tara Harris volunteered to check on the health of strays and offered basic veterinary advice. Even old Mr. Wilkins, the gruff handyman with hands like shovels, built a sturdy bench for the yard, so everyone 2-legged or 4 would have a place to rest. Luis, now a regular, brought his own rescued puppy, a scruffy mutt named Coco, who quickly became Sunny's constant companion. With every Saturday gathering, more children joined, more pets found a warm lap or a gentle touch, and more adults lingered to share stories or simply bask in the glow of something good growing in their midst. The group formalized itself into the Willowbrook Pet Pals, with June as their unofficial leader. They began organizing small fundraising events like bake sales and lemonade stands, the proceeds going toward food blankets and veterinary care for abandoned or sick animals. The town's old wounds, the quiet grief of June's widowhood, the ache of children like Luis, who longed for friends, slowly knitted together through laughter, flour, and the wagging tails that now seemed to be everywhere. Each Saturday ended with a walk through the neighborhood, dogs and children, trailing behind June and Sunny, who walked proudly at the head of the pack. Sophie often took Luis's hand, telling him stories about Walter Hammond and the dog who waited at the door. "Sunny helped bring us together," she'd say, "and now we help each other." Sunny, older and a little slower now, would pause and glance back at the parade behind him, his brown eyes shining with contentment. June, too, found her sorrow softening, with every story shared, every small hand pressed into hers, every bark and burst of laughter that echoed into the evening. Willowbrook was no longer just a place of memories. It was a living community woven together by the golden thread of a dog's unspoken promise and the hope that springs from second chances. The first crack of thunder split the midnight silence, sending a shiver through the town of Willowbrook. Rain battered the windows of June Foster's house, drumming out a frantic rhythm, while the trees along Maple Lane bent under the assault of a restless wind. Inside, June was dozing lightly in her armchair, a knitted shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair, now silver with age, framed a face that had grown softer these past few months. a face no longer pinched by loneliness, but warmed by laughter, lines earned from weekends filled with children and dogs. Sophie curled under a blanket beside her, held Sunny close. The golden retriever, usually content to nap through a storm, seemed unusually restless tonight. His tail thumped, and he whined, ears pricked toward the door, as if he sensed some distant silent alarm. June blinked awake. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, but Sunny only paced to the door and back again, circling anxiously. When the next flash of lightning turned the world ghostly white, Sunny let out a sharp bark and pawed insistently at the front door. Sophie sat up, concern etching her young face. "Should we let him out?" "Not in this weather," June replied, but her words faltered as Sunny's whines turned to urgent barks echoing over the wind. Before June could react, Sunny seized the edge of his leash and tugged, insistent gaze fixed on something only he could sense. The storm howled, and another peal of thunder rattled the windows. Relenting, June pulled on her raincoat, a bright yellow one, that made her look almost comically small against the tempest. Sophie, brave as ever, slipped into her red boots and gripped a flashlight in trembling hands. The door flung open, letting in a spray of rain and a wild rush of air. Sunny bolted into the darkness, his golden coat nearly glowing under the porch light before being swallowed by the night. June and Sophie hurried after him, shoes squelching in puddles. The wind tugged at their clothes and the rain stung their faces, but Sunny moved with purpose, nose to the ground, barking into the void. He led them along the flooded curb past sleeping houses until he stopped abruptly at a storm drain where the water rushed in torrents. June's heart seized. She spotted a small, sodden shape tangled in the iron grating, a puppy barely older than a few months, its fur plastered to its trembling body, whimpering in terror. The puppy was chocolate brown, with a splash of white on its chest and paws, ears still too big for its head. Sunny barked frantically, pawing at the grate, while the water threatened to sweep the tiny animal away. Sophie gasped, eyes wide with fear and determination. "We have to help," she cried, and without waiting for permission, she knelt beside Sunny, reaching for the puppy. June, though frail, moved quickly, anchoring herself to Sophie as the rain poured harder. But the puppy was wedged tight, its leg caught on a jagged edge. Sunny, sensing the urgency, wedged his own shoulder beneath Sophie's arm, steady and immovable. With the kind of courage born of desperate love, Sophie reached in her fingers, cold and numb, coaxing the terrified puppy as June steadied her. Sunny's muzzle pressed close, licking the pup's nose, his own whines soft and encouraging. After what felt like an eternity, the puppy's leg came free. Sophie wrapped it in her coat and pulled it close, her own tears mixing with the rain. Sunny nudged them both, then took off back toward home, leading June and Sophie through the howling wind, their precious rescue sheltered against June's chest. The storm finally broke as they reached June's porch. The house felt impossibly warm after the chaos outside. June toweled off the puppy with gentle hands, her voice soothing, while Sophie offered bits of leftover roast chicken. Sunny, muddy and exhausted, watched over them all, his eyes shining with quiet pride. By morning, word had spread through Willowbrook. The story traveled from June's lips to Mrs. Abernathy's, then to Tom at the bakery, and soon the whole neighborhood was buzzing with awe. Sunny, the loyal, grieving dog who'd once waited at a closed door, was now the town's hero. That Saturday, the pet pals gathered as usual. Luis arrived with his mother, Elena shy, but excited, a hopeful look in his eyes. The puppy, now cleaned and fed, wagged its tiny tail with surprising strength for such a little thing. Luis's face broke into a smile as June offered him the honor of holding the pup. "Would you like to take care of him, Luis?" she asked softly. Luis nodded, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Can I, really?" Elena, tears bright in her eyes, hugged him close. "You can," June replied. "Every puppy needs a home, and every boy needs a friend." The puppy snuggled into Luis's arms, licking his chin with a tiny pink tongue. The children gathered round, voices bubbling with excitement. Tom, never one to miss a moment, declared, "Let's call him Buddy." The name stuck, and Buddy quickly became the latest member of the Pet Pals, a bundle of energy and joy that followed Luis everywhere. For Luis, the fear that had once shadowed him, of being the new kid, of losing someone he loved, slowly faded, replaced by the steady comfort of Buddy's presence, and the kindness of friends who understood that healing could be found in even the most unexpected places. Sonny watched from the sidelines, tail thumping as the town celebrated their hero and the boy who had found hope in a rescued pup. The storm was over, but its memory lingered as a reminder that sometimes in the darkest nights, love finds a way to shine brightest. Spring arrived in Willowbrook, with the grace of a painter sweeping away the remnants of winter's gray, with bursts of emerald grass cherry blossoms, and a sky so blue it seemed to promise something new to every heart. The air was sweet with the scent of lilacs and wet earth. It was the season when windows were thrown open, laughter spilled into gardens, and hope felt as certain as the sunrise. June Foster stood at her porch early one morning, hands on her hips, gazing across the street at children playing hopscotch on the fresh pavement. She wore her favorite floral dress, a little faded but cheerful, her gray hair twisted into a neat bun. Her face, once shadowed by old loss, was softer these days, animated by gentle smiles and the warmth of purpose. There was a new energy about her, as if the quiet ache that had lived in her bones for years had finally eased. Sonny, his golden fur gleaming in the sunlight, trotted beside her with a tennis ball clamped between his teeth. He seemed every bit the hero. The town saw him as tail-wagging eyes, bright a creature built for joy, yet marked by the patience and wisdom only deep loyalty brings. At almost 6 years old, his muzzle was beginning to show the faintest touch of white, but his spirit was undimmed. As the morning stretched on, neighbors wandered by. Tom from the bakery arrived first, his apron dusted in flour, bearing a tray of cinnamon rolls. He was stocky, his face perennially ruddy from years of working ovens and laughing at his own jokes. Tom's son, Jamie, trailed shyly behind, tall for his 11 years, with sandy hair and the reserved gaze of someone who preferred animals to crowds. He quickly found a spot beside Sonny, throwing the ball for him while adults mingled. Sophie skipped in with her mother, Carla, a brisk woman with sharp eyes softened by kindness. Carla's story was one of single motherhood and working nights at the hospital, her frame slight, her manner efficient, but she always made time to help with June's projects, never hesitating when someone needed her. Sophie, bright and earnest, immediately started organizing the younger children for a game of hide-and-seek, her giggles pealing through the air. Luis arrived hand in hand with his mother, Elena, who spoke with a lilting accent from her years growing up in New Mexico. Elena was petite with lively brown eyes and an infectious optimism. Luis, now transformed from the timid boy he'd once been, carried Buddy in his arms. The puppy, sturdy and mischievous, yipped excitedly, already adored by every child in the neighborhood. Other dogs, some adopted from June's informal rescue group, bounded around the yard. Patch, a one-eyed beagle with a love for treats. Daisy, a sleek black lab with a scar on her ear from an old injury. And Ginger, a mutt of uncertain lineage but boundless affection. Each dog had a story, and June remembered them all. This Saturday was special. With the return of warm weather, June had organized the first official Willowbrook Spring Fest, a patchwork of games, gardening, and shared meals. She had spent weeks planning, inspired by a promise she'd once made to herself, in the dark days after losing her son, that she would someday build a place where every child felt safe and every stray was welcome. June's kitchen bustled with the aroma of baked dog biscuits, while in the backyard, tables were set up with paints, flower pots, and seeds for the children to plant. Tom led a workshop in making bread, his hands flying with skill as he regaled the kids with stories. Sophie and Jamie ran a contest to see who could teach Sonny and Buddy the funniest tricks. Carla distributed first aid kits to each family, a small gesture, but one that spoke of her unspoken care for her neighbors. Elena, meanwhile, started a dance circle for the younger children, her laughter drawing in even the shyest. For every heart present there was something to take part in, and for every hand a way to help. As the festivities carried on, June took a quiet moment to sit beneath the old oak in her backyard, Sonny at her side. She stroked his head thoughtfully, speaking in a gentle voice only he could hear. "You know, my boy, you saved me as much as you saved anyone else." Sonny gazed at her with those deep, forgiving eyes nuzzling her palm. The warmth of his fur was a comfort, a silent affirmation that love once planted grows roots even through stone. As dusk fell, the group gathered for one last moment together. Children's faces were smudged with paint and dust. Dogs sprawled, exhausted and happy at their feet. June stood, hands slightly trembling, but voice clear, and called for everyone's attention. This community, our little family, has been changed by one very special dog, Sonny. You taught us about loyalty, about how hope survives the hardest storms. I used to believe my heart was too old and battered to open again, but you You prove me wrong. So, today with all of you as witnesses, I want to make it official. Sonny, would you like to stay here in this house forever? She knelt holding out a new collar. She'd bought a bright blue one with a tag engraved. If you're reading this, I found my way home. Sonny's tail thudded wildly. Sophie and Jamie cheered. Luis, grinning from ear to ear, hugged Buddy close. Tom whistled. Even Carla's eyes shone with tears. June slipped the collar over Sonny's head. He nudged her, licking her cheek, and for a moment it seemed as if the whole town exhaled in relief, like a collective hope had finally been realized. The festival wound down in golden twilight. June's yard, once a quiet refuge for a lonely widow, had become the heart of a thriving community. Laughter and stories lingered in the air. Sonny, no longer a dog waiting at a closed door, sprawled contentedly at June's feet, surrounded by his family, old wounds healed by new beginnings, promises planted and blooming. 3 years swept quietly over Willowbrook, brushing silver into the hair of its elders and long limbs onto its children. The seasons cycled through their familiar rhythms, summer's lazy green afternoons, autumn's crackle of leaves beneath booted feet, winter's hush and ice-laced windows, and spring's jubilee of color. The world outside changed as worlds do. But within the old Hammond house, a sturdy sun-washed Victorian at the corner of Sycamore and Willow, something gentle had taken root and flourished. The house, once haunted by the absence of Walter Hammond, was now known across town as Golden Place. Painted a cheerful yellow with white trim and a swing creaking softly on the front porch, it stood as a symbol of community and new beginnings. The sign by the gate was painted by Sophie herself, now a young teen with a quick smile, and the kind of long tawny hair that always looked windswept. The letters were a little crooked but bold, Golden Place for friends, big and small. And every afternoon, Golden Place came alive. Children from all over Willowbrook scampered across the lawn, weaving between garden beds overflowing with daisies, marigolds, and the odd stubborn tomato. Elderly neighbors gathered on the porch, knitting, sharing stories, or sometimes just listening to the laughter that seemed to echo around the eaves like the memory of summer rain. There was always a fresh pitcher of lemonade on the table and a tin of homemade dog biscuits waiting just inside the door. And there at the heart of it all was Sonny. Age had left its gentle mark on the golden retriever. His muzzle was white now, his gait a touch slower, his eyes clouded at the edges but undimmed in warmth. At nearly 9 years old, Sonny carried himself with a calm, dignified grace, his coat still soft and shining. He wore the same blue collar, though the tag was battered and worn. Children adored him, especially Sophie, who, though grown taller, still knelt every evening to wrap her arms around his neck, whispering secrets into his fur, as she'd done since childhood. June Foster presided over the house with an open heart and a tireless spirit. Though her back had stooped and her hands were etched with more lines, her gaze was lively, her voice gentle but commanding. She had grown into her role as the mother of Willowbrook, organizing craft days, mediating playground squabbles, soothing bruised knees, and comforting broken hearts. She was quick with a joke, a story, or a plate of cookies, and her kitchen always smelled of cinnamon and love. Luis, once the shy boy from another state, was now a confident part of the crowd. He and Buddy, now a handsome, spirited adult dog, were inseparable, often leading younger kids on imaginary quests around the garden. Tom the baker had started a weekly bread morning at Golden Place, arriving with baskets of still-warm loaves and inviting anyone to join him in kneading dough or sharing tales. Jamie, quieter but thoughtful, helped organize the annual charity drive that raised funds for rescue animals, and Elena was the unofficial photographer capturing moments for the community scrapbook. On the anniversary of Walter Hammond's passing, the whole town gathered for a special day at Golden Place, a tradition that had grown into the heart of Willowbrook's calendar. The morning dawned bright and clear, a gentle breeze stirring the wind chimes by the door. Bunting and flowers festooned the yard, and a long table overflowed with food. Tom's pastries, Elena's empanadas, June's famous lemonade, Carla's fruit pies, and dozens of dishes contributed by neighbors. Sophie, her arms full of marigolds, carefully wove blooms into a garland that she draped around Sonny's neck. Now, 14, she was tall and graceful, but still kept the same light in her eyes that had once melted the walls of her own loneliness. Luis presented Sonny with a handmade bandana sewn by the children in the craft room, stitched with the words, "Hero of Willowbrook." June rang the old brass bell that had once belonged to Walter, calling the crowd to attention. Her voice, though softer with age, carried across the garden. Today, we honor the spirit that brought us all together, Walter Hammond, who believed every life had value, and Sonny, whose loyalty reminded us that love is the greatest gift we can give. Because of them, we have found each other. We have built a family from the threads of loss and hope. We remember and we celebrate. The children lined up to share their favorite memories of Sonny. Some spoke of the time he comforted them after a bad dream, others of the way he always knew when someone was sad laying his head in their lap. Tom joked about how Sonny had once stolen a loaf of bread, and then seeing Tom's mock anger had apologized by bringing him a squeaky toy. Elena told a story of how her own dog Buddy had learned courage from Sonny. Jamie recited a poem he'd written, his quiet voice brimming with feeling. As the sun dipped low, the entire gathering strolled down to the little town cemetery. At Walter's grave, a simple stone beneath a willow tree the community placed, flowers stood in silence and then, as Sophie started it, joined in a song that had become Golden Place's anthem. It was a song about home and hope and the magic of a dog's love. Sonny, as always, lay at the foot of the grave, gazing up at the sky, his family encircling him. The evening ended with laughter stories and children chasing fireflies as dusk painted the town in lavender and gold. Willowbrook glowed not just with lanterns strung across porches, but with the warmth of friendships forged and old wounds healed. June and Sophie sat side by side on the porch swing. Sonny stretched between them, both women, one young one, old resting their hands in the soft gold of his fur. The air was filled with promise, and even the oldest hearts felt young again. Golden Place stood as proof that even the deepest grief can bloom into something beautiful when watered by kindness and faith. In Willowbrook, happiness was not just a memory, but a living, breathing presence, thanks above all to the unwavering heart of one old golden retriever. In the end, Sonny's story reminds us that true loyalty and kindness can heal the deepest wounds and turn strangers into family. In our own lives, perhaps we all have a little Willowbrook inside us, a place where reaching out, caring for others, and sharing small acts of love can create miracles we never expect. If this story touched your heart, share it with a friend, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. What does loyalty mean to you? Tell us your answer in the comments and join the conversation.